very much. First of all, I just wanted to say thanks very much to the organisers and inviting us to speak today. It's really great to have the chance to exchange with you colleagues, and I'm really happy to be here. As a nature person, I'm more accustomed to staying in tents outside, so to come here to these fabulous places is incredible. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to further exchanges. So for those of you who I haven't had the chance to speak to yet, my name is Matthew Emsley-Smith. I work with IUCN in the World Heritage team in fulfilling IUCN's role as advisory body to the World Heritage Committee. I'm going to talk to you today about some of the issues and challenges, but also opportunities that we come across in our work and that we try to develop through our work on the intersections between tourism, climate change and world heritage. So I'm going to start with an introduction on some of the impacts that we're seeing to natural world heritage sites as a result of climate change, and also look at trends in tourism management and also instances where tourism can represent threats to outstanding universal value. And for these sections, I'm going to focus on results from the IUCN World Heritage Outlook, which is IUCN's flagship knowledge product on World Heritage, and I'll give you a bit of introduction into what that is as well, before I launch into the results. Then I'll come into some of the benefits of World Heritage in terms of addressing climate change and some of the opportunities of utilising tourism as a vector for climate action in World Heritage, using some of best practice examples and case studies. Then I'll also talk about some of the guidance that we're working on with ICRON and the other advisory body, and the wider policy settings before coming to some conclusions. So, like I said, I'll start the talk with some of the results from the IUCN World Heritage Outlook. For those of you who are not familiar with this assessment, it's IUCN's global assessment of the potential of natural world heritage sites to conserve their values over time. So this is an assessment that IUCN undertakes periodically. We've done 3 of these assessments so far, the first being in 2014, then 2017, and the most recent update was in 2020. So we're starting to see with these assessments what the emerging trends are in terms of threats to world heritage, but also trends in protection and management. And this process, the outlook process, sits alongside the formal processes within the convention itself, the reactive monitoring process, to try to complement it in a way. We use the outlook assessments, whereas through the SOC process and through the reactive monitoring process, only a small number of world heritage sites come to the attention of the committee. The outlook looks at all sites inscribed under natural criteria and applies a standardized methodology to assessing those. And we assess all of those sites according to that methodology. So a bit about the methodology: we look at the values, in other words, the attributes which make up its outstanding universal value alongside other important biodiversity values. And we're also, for the next cycle, looking at integrating cultural values and indigenous cultural values into consideration within the assessments themselves. We then weigh up the threats to those values, and we look at the protection and management in place at each of the different sites. Based on the assessment criteria, each of these different aspects is given a score from good to bad, or from green to red, if you like. And cumulatively, they make up the overall conservation outlook for the individual site. And the overall conservation outlook ranges, as you can see on the screen, from critical through to good. And so because we have these quite detailed information, but wrapped up in quite a sort of communicatable package, we can start to draw out trends from the individual site level all the way up to the global level. And I'm going to present to you now some of those sort of global level trends as they relate to climate change and tourism. And so firstly, climate change is now the greatest single threat to natural world heritage. The second outlook assessment identified climate change as the fastest growing threat in comparison to 2014. And in 2020 it became the most numerous threat to natural world heritage sites across the board. Climate change impacts are widespread and diverse in nature. Within the assessment, we also look at specific types of impacts associated with climate change, and you can see here the number of sites which are affected by each of the different typologies within climate change. So temperature changes, shifts in habitat, and alteration to the ecosystem functions, increased storms and flooding, etc., etc. So this is just to demonstrate that the impacts of climate change are manifold and they relate specifically to the characteristics of the individual sites. Which brings me on to the next slide, which just highlights, again, based on the specific characteristics of the sites, certain ecosystems and certain habitats and species have different vulnerabilities to climate change effects. So you can see in this graph that mangroves and tundra, for example, are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And so that perhaps this has implications in terms of priorities in addressing climate change and adapting models for managing these sites is more important where these particularly vulnerable ecosystems are present within sites. Another impact that we're seeing, and we've done quite a bit of work on this, is around World Heritage glaciers. So glaciers within World Heritage sites cover almost 10% of the Earth's glaciarized area, and they also play a crucial role in water systems across the globe through their provisioning services. They regulate ecosystems, including many World Heritage sites across the world. Over the past couple of years, we've undertaken a couple of studies where we've inventoried glaciers within World Heritage sites and looked at their mass changes over the past 20 years, but also projected those changes in mass of glaciers within World Heritage sites under different climate scenarios. And we found some quite stark and quite worrying trends in that around in half of all sites in which glaciers are present. Glaciers could disappear by 2100 in a business as usual emissions scenario. And this may have strong effects on the integrity and value of these World Heritage sites, and could even directly question the recognised OEV, particularly in sites where they're inscribed, at least in part, for their exceptional glaciers. So it presents challenges also in terms of how the Convention responds to these fundamental questions of outstanding universal value in the face of climate change. Marine sites appear to be disproportionately affected by climate change. On the left here you can see the proportion of all natural World Heritage sites highly impacted by climate change. And on the right in dark blue you can see the proportion of marine sites. 60% of the 50 marine sites assessed in 2020 are highly threatened by climate change. And these effects are most likely as a result of, again, climate change impacts which are specific to the marine realm, so coral bleaching, sea level rise, and ocean acidification, etc. So that was a summation of the impacts that we're seeing at the global level of climate change on World Heritage sites. And I'm going to look now into some of the impacts of tourism when it's not managed properly, and when tourism can actually represent a threat to outstanding universal value. So you've seen this graph before, showing that climate change is the greatest single threat to natural World Heritage. But if you look to the right, you can see that tourism is also in the top 3 threats across the board when we look at the sites assessed in the last update of the World Heritage Outlook. Tourism is also a growing threat. Here you can see the results in terms of tourism as a threat over time from each assessment cycle of the Outlook. And you can see both in terms of tourism visitation, but also development and tourism infrastructure. So that's tourism-related developments such as accommodation, resorts, access infrastructure, etc. is also a growing threat to World Heritage sites. Associated to this also is a trend that we're seeing around changes and weakening of environmental legislation to facilitate this infrastructure. This can happen within World Heritage sites, and this is when it's particularly concerning, noting the fact that protection and management and legal protection is a strong pillar of outstanding universal value. but it can also happen outside of the World Heritage Sites that have impacts to the outstanding universal value of the site. Out of these impacts that you can see on tourism infrastructure, over half of the threats originate from outside the World Heritage Site itself. And so this just emphasises the need for effective land use planning and impact assessment, and approaches which take into account the broader setting of the heritage place, also incorporating effective buffer zones, etc., etc. When we look at some of the results from the protection and management section of the Outlook assessment, we can see that over all sites, tourism is actually effectively managed in under half of all natural World Heritage sites. So this just shows the scale of the challenge which we're presented with in World Heritage sites that are threatened or impacted by mass tourism or over-visitation tourism. And when we look at a specific subset of this data, when we look at sites who are have low financing or whose sustainable financing models were assessed to be of concern, we see that this trend is even more stark, and sites that have financing issues are more likely to experience significant issues in tourism and visitation management. But whilst this is not exactly surprising, it just underscores the need for sustainable finance mechanisms for effective management of tourism. In particular, when you consider that tourism revenues are often used to finance management, and so understanding the dynamics between tourism, financing and management, and putting conservation of OEV at the heart of that becomes absolutely critical in these instances. I'm going to move now on to some of the benefits of World Heritage and some of the opportunities of tourism to promote better climate action and promote conservation of outstanding universal value. I'm going to speak to a study that we carried out jointly with the World Resources Institute and UNESCO on carbon prices in World Heritage forests, in which we found that forests in World Heritage sites absorb approximately 190 million tonnes of CO2 from the atmosphere each year, and this is comparable to roughly half of the UK's annual CO2 emissions from fossil fuels. So if you look at these two figures, the little bar shows the net flux of carbon in these systems when you look at the removal of carbon from the atmosphere compared to their emissions. So in each instance, across regions and also across climate domains, World Heritage forests are currently carbon sinks. And so it just points to the benefit of conserving outstanding universal value in solving climate change through increased mitigation efforts, carbon storage, and carbon sequestration. However, there's a significant caveat to this, in that this same study found that as a result of human activity and the compounding impacts of climate change, 10 World Heritage sites were net carbon emitters over the past 20 years. And the World Heritage Outlook points to some of the potential reasons for this, including logging, land clearance for agriculture, fires which are compounded by climate change itself, as well as other climate change related impacts such as habitat shifting and alteration. So again, this just points to the need to conserve outstanding universal value so that we continue to receive these benefits from World Heritage. I'm going to move now on to some solutions, some case studies, and I'm going to advertise, if you like, the opportunity and the tool of panorama solutions for a healthy planet. This is a really great initiative, which is a joint initiative of IUCN and a number of other organisations, including ICROM, including ICMOS, amongst others. It's a platform which helps to document and promote examples of conservation solutions across a range of different conservation topics and sustainable development topics. So it hopes to enable cross-sectoral learning and upscaling of successes, and allows practitioners to share and reflect on their experiences, but also increase recognition of successful work and increase repetition of successful work across different contexts. So The online panorama platform, which you can access through the link here, has a number of really helpful resources, including solutions in focused publications, where we group together different themes and we highlight specific examples of best practice. There are also individual case studies which you can search for. And these are available according to region, according to ecosystem, according to several thematic communities. One which might be particularly interesting for those of us in the room today is the thematic community on nature culture, where we look at the different approaches and different solutions that can be gained by adopting these nature culture approaches. But there's loads of different solutions and loads of different themes that you can search for. And just to give you an example of what a panorama solution looks like, I'm just going to give you a quick example from a World Heritage Site in Mexico, from Shanghai, which I just pulled out from a quick search. Shanghai is a World Heritage Site on the east coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Its OUV is centered around its tropical forests, its mangrove system, it has inland marshes, and it also has a marine section of the site, including a barrier reef. And the mangrove system in this site is particularly key to its outstanding universal value, not only as an attribute of the OUV itself, but also in terms of the regulating services that it provides for the rest of the ecosystem. So, for example, the mangroves provide a nursery ground for many of the marine species which make up the attributes of the marine portion. It also traps sediment flowing from the freshwater systems, which improves the health of the reef itself. It provides coastal protection from storms, which are increasing as a result of climate change, to the inland portions of the property as well. So I can't emphasize enough how important these mangrove systems are to the OUV in the site. And this is a project which was implemented by CONAP, which is the Mexican Protected Areas Authority, which looks to restore these mangroves using a multi-sectoral approach, engaging different sectors, different communities to pull together and help improve the outstanding universal value of the site, but also by using tourism to do so. And the way the panorama solutions are set out, they are set out in these, they have these building blocks, and I'm just going to run you through the building blocks of this specific project. So, firstly, they undertook a mangrove restoration project, which restored the mangroves through mangrove planting and through improvement of habitat to expand the areas of mangroves within the property. And in doing so, they strengthened the stocking of the local lobster fisheries by providing this nursery ground for lobster larvae. So already there are benefits to the local fisheries sector. They carried out this mangrove restoration by employing agricultural workers. These agricultural workers were not traditionally engaged with the mangrove systems themselves, and so by engaging this different sector, they created buy-in and they created new allies in the conservation of the OUV of the site. Thirdly, through training of the local fisheries sector, they increased the adaptive capacity by offering opportunities to diversify their income through tourism. So they promoted fishing tours for tourists, and advertised the opportunities by connecting them with tourism operators for the fishermen to take out fishing tours, take out tourists on fishing tours, and therefore diversify their income sources as a means to diversify their income and increase their adaptive capacity in the face of climate change. Fourthly, they developed local products from the mangroves themselves. So they looked at non-extractive products from the mangroves, including jams and honey, which came from the flowers of the mangroves, to boost productivity and increase, again, just diversify the income of the local communities. They worked with local cooperatives, in particular women within the fishing communities, to boost their entrepreneurial skills through training programs, through networking events. And finally, they work with local research institutes to make sure that the monitoring frameworks were placed to ensure that all of these activities were aligned with the conservation of outstanding universal value. So it's just a quick example that I thought I would give to give you guys an idea of what a panorama solution looks like. But also I thought it was a really cool example of how tourism can be leveraged towards the conservation of outstanding universal value. I'm going to look at another solution which we worked on just last year in partnership with an organisation called Parte, also working in and around a World Heritage Site, this time in Peru, the Rio Abiseo National Park. It's a site whose OUV is centred around its cloud forests, its high altitude grasslands, and it also has pre-Hispanic archaeological values to the site as well. It's a mixed site. So we worked with local communities. This was, I think, before I get into the different phases of the project, it's important to note that this was a post-pandemic project, and it was designed as a way of just touching on what we were discussing earlier, building back better, promoting sustainable tourism as an avenue for community development, which promotes climate change adaptation, but is also in line with the conservation of outstanding universal value. So the first step in this program was to carry out baseline surveys to get a clear understanding of the current situation of tourism post-pandemic. So the local communities were interviewed in terms of the effects of the pandemic on their livelihoods, what the impacts of the lack of tourism had on those communities, as well as the interactions between the tourism industry and the national park. And this formed the basis of the sort of starting point of the project. The communities then convened to envision how they would like tourism to be in their community, and they came up with these so-called collective dreams. And based on these visions for tourism within their communities, they agreed upon action plans, community-led action plans that would guide their activities relating to community tourism development. Part of the action plans included cash for work activities, which came from funding from the project, which enabled community members to use their skills to develop tourism infrastructure that would contribute to the value of the products and services that they were looking to develop. And so in this way, community members were able to be employed, whilst also adding value to the eventual tourism product. Part of the baseline surveys also identified that limited access to training in terms of entrepreneurship and marketing was a key limiting factor in developing tourism within their communities. And so we brought in experts in these issues to work with the communities and train them. The focus for the training in the project was on health and safety, ecotourism product itinerary development, and marketing and promotion. And then the final element of the project was FAM trips, so-called FAM trips, which were undertaken, which connected the communities with local and regional tourism operators, gave the communities a chance to put into practice what they designed and planned and take forward into the future. And just again, touching on what we were discussing earlier about more localized models of tourism, we tried to make sure that national level and local level tourism providers were included and connected to the communities in this process to encourage these more localized tourism development models. So again, it's just another example that we've been working on within IUCN, which I think is a best practice example, if you like. And here are some of the tours and some of the tourism projects which ended up being developed as a result of the project. And you can see that all of them are in some way complementary or based on their existing livelihood activities. And so they're really sort of integrated and complement those existing practices and celebrate in a way their local culture and their local communities. I'm going to come on to now some of the tools and guidelines that are available and I think could be really useful for those of you in the room who are interested to engage in. And actually, I'm really happy to see that I think almost all of these have already been covered by my colleagues who have already spoken today, and I think that's evidence, I guess, of the sort of collaborative approach that we're taking these days between the advisory bodies. A number of these resources have been developed through the World Heritage Leadership Programme, and as Joe said, these will be becoming available very soon, including a new website where you can get all of these resources in one place. And just again to advertise the opportunity through the World Heritage Leadership courses to engage in those courses, in those training courses, to learn how to use and apply these various different tools and guidelines to better manage World Heritage sites. Again, pointing to the nature, culture, sort of people-centered approaches that we're trying to take. Another aspect which I thought would be useful to mention is the development of a policy document on climate action for World Heritage, which is currently at the draft stage. But we are hoping, we've got our fingers crossed, that this policy document will be adopted at some point this year. The policy document has outlines 5 major areas for climate action: assessing climate risks, climate adaptation and mitigation, knowledge sharing and capacity building, as well as an element on creating transformational change. And tourism is actually referenced throughout the policy document, and so there are leverage points there, or opportunities for heritage practitioners, site managers, estates parties, to promote tourism as a tool for climate action on World Heritage. And there are also recommendations within that policy document for implementation of the different clauses within the policy document itself, which range from site level all the way up to the International World Heritage Committee level. So once that policy document is adopted, I would encourage all of you to read through it and to think about how you can implement some of the causes or challenges, I guess, in achieving the implementation of this policy. And just finally, I just thought I would also just link back to this idea of World Heritage as an effective tool in contributing to other global agendas, so climate change, biological diversity, sustainable development goals. Within IUCN, our World Heritage work is nested within a heritage and culture team, where we're looking to look more broadly at questions of cultural and biological diversity and the relationship between these two things. And this is really built on our experiences within IUCN in the World Heritage Convention and the approaches that we've adopted and learned from on the nature culture element within the convention itself. And we're now looking to expand these messages and really plug them through IUCN's different channels and different policy positions at the UNFCCC, at the CBD, etc., etc. And so I thought just an important point to end on. Finally, some conclusions. Climate change and tourism represent 2 of the greatest threats to OUV. And impacts are widespread and diverse and differ according to the specific characteristics and location of World Heritage sites. However, the World Heritage Convention is a unique mechanism to safeguard heritage in the face of climate change, and as well as provide nature-based solutions, including through tourism. And tourism can be a friend, if you like, in addressing the impacts of climate change in World Heritage sites, but only if it's managed effectively and equitably. There are lots of success stories to be learned from, and the guidance and tools are there to use, and I think the challenge now is rolling out these guidances and making sure that these tools are used across the board, whether that be from site managers, estates parties, or any other heritage practitioners, the tourism industry, for example, as well. And finally, just a final point on the policy document, and an invitation to all of you here to have a look at it once it's adopted. So thanks very much for listening, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Matthew, for sharing with us all these solutions within the Panorama project, and also other very interesting best practices, in fact, that we should look forward to see more details. And we would like now to know if anybody from people who are here has some inspiration or insights to share with us.
Hello, my name is Petra. I'm from Czech Republic, and I work for the National Heritage Institute, more specifically for the Department of Agriculture, Monument with the international status. Why I say the international status? Because under the auspice of UNESCO there are 6 agricultural conventions, so it's not only the convention of 1972. And our department is responsible for the monitoring of the World Heritage Sites. I will have to mention it, so it's a mention of the protection of the cultural heritage during the armed conflict, and we are also responsible for the the new nominations projects. I wanted to share with you an example how the synergies of 2 conventions could be a little bit tricky and could create page 22. We have one culture site inscribed in the World Heritage List, so it's area of Lednice and Markice. So it's the area in south of Moravia in Czech Republic. So more specifically north of Vienna. And it's a cultural landscape created artificially by men. So by family of Liechtenstein between the 17th and 20th century. And at the same time, the landscape, the area is protected by the Ramsar Convention on wetlands, and it's a biospheric reserve of UNESCO. And why I'm saying this? Because, for example, the landscape was created by the man, so it's an artificial landscape, and let's say the landscape architect created the landscape by nature as a picture, so it's very lovely. And when the landscape was protected, let's say, so the new species and the new animals arrived. So we have, for example, beaver, which is protected by the law. And now the beaver, well, we have a lot of beavers there. So they are creating the barriers in the landscape. And from the culture point of view, from the culture landscape, so it's not so good because you can't have the river with the barriers and with trees. So it's like a diplomatic approach when you deal with the conservation, with the nature conservation agency, because everyone has his opinion and his point of view. So the Nature Conservation Agency wants to protect the area from the nature point of view, and the National Heritage Institute wants to protect the area from the culture values corresponding with the outstanding universal value. And so I wanted to share with you this how could it be tricky the synergies of the conventions, because when you say it's protected, so certainly it's good, but sometimes it could create absurd situations.
Yeah, thanks for your point. It's a really interesting, I guess, conundrum instance where there are perhaps what could be perceived as conflicting or competing interests between different conventions and between different agendas. We did actually do some work quite a few years ago now, in 2016. IUCN produced a publication on managing multiple internationally designated areas, where we looked at the intersections between Ramsar sites, UNESCO World Heritage sites, biosphere reserves and UNESCO geoparks, to try to provide some advice in terms of how these areas, which are inscribed or are part of multiple different international designations, how their approach to management can be harmonized and how the different approaches in the different conventions can be utilized in a way which is going to maximize the benefits and limit these types of scenarios where there are conflicting interests. So if you'd be interested, I'd be happy to send you that publication. And I think more broadly it just speaks again to the importance of adopting these nature culture approaches to make sure that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet, I guess, and we're putting people at the centre of consideration.
You said, I have a question in fact, because you said that half natural World Heritage sites are effectively managed in terms of tourism. Which are the measures you take? I mean, what do you take into consideration to make such an assessment or calculation? Because it surprised me half. I think it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a really stark result.
So, what did you take into consideration just to make such an assessment?
Yeah, so the outlook assessments are broken down, as I said, into three overarching assessment criteria: the values, the threats, and the protection and management. But within those three overarching areas, there are a number of different assessment criteria. And the results for the tourism management came from the third assessment area on protection and management. There's a specific consideration within the assessment methodology for considering the tourism management within the sites. And that specific assessment criteria is based on comes from a number of different sources, but they all draw upon IUCN standards and guidelines from across our network. So Fergus mentioned that we have a specialist group on tourism in protected areas who develop standards for management of tourism within protected areas, and the assessment criteria within the outlook, it draws upon those best practice examples and those standards for management of tourism within protected areas.
Are there kind of indicators or something you assess each and every one just to get to that effectively managed tourism?
Yeah, so there are not indicators as such, because for the outlook assessments we have to cover a broad range of sites, each of them which have their own specific characteristics. So we don't develop specific indicators because that wouldn't be useful when we were applying one assessment methodology to all World Heritage sites globally. But we do try to, within the assessments themselves, draw upon the best practices and compare what's going on within the individual site in terms of tourism management, and assess those against IUCN standards for tourism management within World Heritage sites. I would be happy to provide the tourism methodology for the outlook assessments if you'd be interested.
Thank you. Just from my understanding, it was 50% of a selected amount of natural heritage sites, was it? Or was it all all natural sites globally, or was it all World Heritage Sites globally? So what was the perimeter of the, or what was the scope of the site?
Yeah, I should have probably. Yeah, I should have probably clarified that in my presentation. So the outlook takes into consideration all World Heritage Sites inscribed under natural criteria. So sites inscribed under criteria 7 through to 10. So the result for tourism was 50% of all natural sites inscribed under criteria 7 to 10 are effectively managed in terms of tourism visitation.
Which is a third of, not even, right?
Yeah, it's around 257, I think, natural ones.
No, but Florian, you're saying all of the natural, all the sites inscribed as natural sites have already been assessed. He's talking about the criteria. From the 10 criteria, only which run from 1 to 6, and then from 7 to 10 are natural criteria. And those are the ones he's talking about.
Yes, so probably we're not talking about half of the 1,157 sites are well managed. Only the natural sites.
Yes.
Yeah, half of natural sites, so half of the 257.
Very good presentation, and it's nice to see the lens from the IUCN. And I just wanted to make one point, one question. And one of the points, actually 2 points. One of the points is the fact that, as you can see, there are a lot of really great resources that are out there. And they are accessible, and they are really well calibrated in terms of who's been providing to the GRON, IUCN, EFMOS levels. And it's important to recognize that there's been a lot of consultation that's gone into them. We've gone to different groups, partners, and stakeholders. So in the development of whether it's a charter, whether it's a guideline, whether it's training materials, there's a really, I'm seeing more of an effective role being done by different organizations that act as an advisory role to the World Heritage Committee. So that's one of the things that I'm saying. There is a lot of resources for those persons who are involved with World Heritage Sites in one way or another. The second thing is that, with that being said, I don't know if we do an effective enough job communicating that with regard to our partners, for one, and also at the same time, those persons who really need to be sitting at the same time. We're talking about governments, we're talking about private sector, there's a whole range of other partners who are there. And, like anything, especially if someone has the guidelines or rules or whatever, training materials, some people really embrace it. There are a lot of other people that say, I've got more things to take care of, I'll get to it eventually. So that's a challenge, but I think in reality, we need to do a better job communicating within 3 parties, with UNESCO, but also those stakeholders who are not as traditional or who don't always get brought into the same tent as everyone else. The other question here, and this is just thinking a little bit more broadly, loss and damage has come up a lot. And with all those prospective proposals, discussed monies, etc., could you see an approach or some kind of a joint amongst the 3 advisory bodies approached individually? I'm thinking of places in Africa, South America, Asia, which don't have funds, as many funds compared to other parts of the world. Is there a way to advocate or support some sort of position within that loss and damage discussion? Because it's starting to gain some traction to get to the COP15, COP26. So just a perspective.
Yeah, it's a great question. IUCN has just established a new commission on climate change. And the commission, in close partnership with IUCN's climate change team within the Secretariat, are looking specifically into these issues around loss and damage. In terms of this intersection with World Heritage, we haven't had that conversation yet, so I think it's a good idea and something which needs to be done, yeah, definitely. it's the joint culture major impact assessment guides, actually is done on there. It's online. You can get it from the MCN website, the ECRON website, the GIUGNO website, and the World Heritage website. The management manual, not yet, but the impact assessment guides does exist already. That was the first point. And the second point that I wanted to make was your point about different conventions. Because this has been something that's been gathering once again for me for the last 25 years. The fact that you've got sites which are designated in more than one, many of them UNESCO, but not necessarily only UNESCO. And the question becomes, I mean, this is a really good example down on the ground, if you will, but also issues with reporting, how do you World Heritage has periodic reporting and has reactive monitoring, but under other conventions, you have other kinds of reporting that needs to be done, and how can you sync all of that together? And that's something, and when UNESCO tries to do that, it's not easy to do it though. And I think that is actually something that I would hope. I'm still a little bit early trying to do some things, but I would like to hope that we can actually make some more progress on just creating a more simple system for sites to be able to report to all of these different statuses that they have, and then because otherwise you wind up hiring people just just to fill out reports over and over and working for different conventions. So it's a sort of a general comment, I guess, as I've other people you should do that also.
Okay, so thank you so much for this very interesting meeting. We learned a lot today, and I'll try to wrap up a bit about all the issues that came out. So we have a new charter on tourism, sustainable tourism. We have possibly a new policy for climate action, if the World Heritage Committee will adopt it. Yes, we hope so. We also need to have practical tools to implement these policies at site level. Another issue which came out is that we need to reinforce awareness raising, to make understand and also increase the sense of ownership of communities and different stakeholders. We need as well that we learned today that organizing bodies are already working in synergy, but as well also for cultural science and natural science we need to establish and reinforce more synergies. And also we need, as Joe said, to integrate our management plans within sustainable tourism action plans, which is also very important. We need as well to involve communities in decision making. And then as well we need to start and engage with the new dialogue between heritage community and tourism industry. So I think that with this in mind, we can really work, as Carlo Virginia also suggested, in developing a kind of a statement that we can share among also our European network associations of World Heritage Sites. So I really wish to thank you all, Ferguson, Joe, Matthew and Matteo, and all of you for contributing in a very interesting way, and we learned a lot. So now we have lunch time, so we can have a chance as well to continue and sharing our experience and our insights on these very important issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Come back here for the presentation of the Veneto region World Heritage Sites. We have here some colleagues, so I think it will be interesting also for you to learn about our experience in implementing the World Heritage system at local level. Thank you. Yes. Oh, sure. Sorry, I just want also to bring the greetings from Carlo Forcini. I had a chat with him. He's so sorry not to be here, but he sent good work to everybody, and he's looking forward to meet you together in the next future. Okay, thank you.